What if I told you the Bearcats' rise to the college football playoff is worthy of being a 30 for 30 documentary, even though it doesn't yet have an ending? That's on today's episode of Locked On Bearcats.
Our Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen of every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Alex Frank here with you, your host every day, former sports director of Bearcats Media, UC's student-run media organization, commentated Bearcats football and men's basketball games, made a lot of connections with those in the athletic department and those who cover the team professionally, bringing all that experience here to Locked On Bearcats. If you're watching on our Locked On Bearcats YouTube channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and you can also like this video and share a comment as well. If you are downloading from an audio platform, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts, don't forget to share a comment and give it a rating. All of that on audio or YouTube helps more Bearcats fans like you find this podcast. So today, and I was only going to do this in segment 3, but I'm like, you know what? Let's just do it for the whole show. Because it is 30 for 30 Thursday here on Locked On Bearcats. And the first edition of this offseason topic revolves around the Bearcats' rise to the college football playoff. Every great documentary has a conflict. There's some sort of conflict or backstory that is told first to set the scene. You've seen it in documentaries that have been in the 30 for 30 series. So in the Bearcats case, their conflict, their backstory is they were in the depths of college football irrelevancy in the American Athletic Conference. And you think about the situation the program was in. Somebody comes in, and in this case, it's Luke Fickell, the face, of the program, comes in, and all of a sudden things change. That's when the rise starts. Maybe not necessarily his first season, but certainly in his second season. So the documentary, if this were to be a documentary, and I think it'd be a great documentary, because of the backstory, because of the conflict. And you could have a bunch of, media personnel. You could have those in the athletic department who were there at the time and still here. Maybe they're not still here, but they were here at the time Luke Fickell was hired. You could have Dan Hoard. You could have Mo Egger. Those who are around the program every day. You could have players. There would be a wide array of options for interviews and insight and perspectives on what that time was like. That's the backstory. What the program was like in 2016 when Luke Fickell comes in, and it just immediately, even though the results weren't there in the first season, it immediately felt different. And there were a lot of games in 2017, let's be honest, the Bearcats got blown out in. Marshall, they got blown out in. UCF, blowout. USF, blowout. ECU, would rather not talk about that game. But actually, you know what? It would be good for a documentary. Here's why. I remember watching Tony Pike's post-game interview with Luke Fickell after that game. The Bearcats lose that game 48-20. And Luke Fickell said one thing that has always resonated with me. And he said to Tony Pike that they had some soul-searching to do on the ride home. Well, clearly they did. Because they've only lost, 2, 3, 1, and 1. They've only lost 7 times since that game. And that was 4 years ago. That would be a tremendous soundbite in the early part of that documentary. You talk about the exposition See, I learned Plot Mountain in elementary school. Shout out to Amanda Ferguson, Jackie Eschbaugh, Amy Panzica, all my elementary school teachers for teaching me the Plot Mountain. Because I'm applying it here on Locked On Bearcats. See, some things I do remember from elementary school, including the names of my teachers, which I don't know how many other people do that or do remember. But anyway, so the exposition would be where the Bearcats were, and then you got your rising action. It would start with that soundbite, soul searching to do on the ride home. And then they could go into, okay, how are we going to turn this program around? Recruiting, facility upgrades, establishing program identity, being driven through the trenches, offensive and defensive lines, scheduling. We're going to schedule UCLA. We're going to schedule Ohio State. We're going to schedule Notre Dame. We're going to schedule Michigan. We're going to schedule all these Power 5 opponents because that is how we are going to get better, and that is how we are going to play for championships, and that is how we are going to get to the college football playoff. They took a lot of punches in 2017. They took a lot of punches even in 2019. And in 2020, they took some punches. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic was a punch in of itself. So just think about how this documentary would start. Where the Bearcats football program was. And maybe you can go as far back as 2009 with Pike to Binns reaching the top. But then the ugliness of Brian Kelly's exit. And then there were still some good years with Butch Jones, back-to-back Big East championships, Travis Kelce, coming of age. He gets drafted, has a great career with the Chiefs, but then you go into the Tommy Tuberville and how it all bottomed out in 2016. That's where this program starts. That's where this documentary would start. 2009, trying to recover from that, and then ultimately bottoming out in 2016. But then enter Luke Fickell and play whatever soundbite you want to play from his press conference. When he says how he wants to be offensively, when he talks about what he wants the team to be like defensively. Any other soundbite from that press conference that's meaningful, include that in the documentary. And then you can go into recruiting. You can talk about, the punches taken in 2017 and how far this team and how hard this team was going to have to work on the recruiting trail, on the field, in any other area for them to get to the college football playoff. And that leads us to the highs of this rise to the college football playoff and how that would be documented in 30 for 30. So we've got the backstory. We've got the rising action, some soul searching to do, the recruiting, the facility upgrades, the scheduling, the program identity. And it's going to start to pay off as we're going to see in this documentary. I'll explain that next. But first, I need to tell everybody about betonline.net because it is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. Or it says NLF futures. That might be a typo there. I'm not sure. Anyway, BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information from live betting to the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter as he's joined by Richard Stayman, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. Alex Frank here with you, Locked On Bearcats, on this Thursday, May 12th, 2022. NFL schedule comes out tonight. Schedule release at 8. The Bengals, it's reported, are playing the Cowboys in Dallas on Thanksgiving. Can't wait for that. There's also been some other leaks with the Bengals potentially playing the Ravens Sunday Night Football Week 1 in the Natty and going to New Orleans for a Sunday night game Week 3. How about that? And of course, we'll find out where the Falcons are playing, who they're playing and when they're playing them this season. Desmond Ridder, same for the Jets and Sauce Gardner. So a lot going to go down tonight with the NFL schedule release. Alex Frank here with you as it is 30 for 30 Thursday. If the Bearcats rise to the college football playoff, were to be a 30 for 30 documentary, which I think would be a really good documentary, because it has a conflict, because it has a backstory, where the program was before Luke Fickell got here. The slow 7-year bottoming out from the top of Tony Pike, that was a climax. Now, we can go into a whole 30 for 30 on Brian Kelly. That's going to be a future 30 for 30 conversation. But in this case, if the rise to the college football playoff were to be a 30 for 30, so now we've got some rising action here. We've got some results. This would be where you see profiles of players like Desmond Ridder and Sauce Gardner. How Desmond Ridder comes in on the third possession of the 2018 season. Remember on yesterday's show when I said, if you need proof of why Evan Prater should be the next quarterback for the Bearcats, look no further than week 1 of 2018, the third offensive possession at UCLA. Desmond Ridder comes in and instantly, that was bad. There we go. Instantly, the offense started it was so much better to watch. You felt like that offense could compete with any team that they played that season. And it could. They won 10 games. 11 games, rather. 10 in the regular season, and then the Military Bowl. So that would be the profile on Ridder. This little-known quarterback from Kentucky who got an offer in the porta potty at the Kentucky Derby. That's a true story. One of only 2 offers. He commits to Cincinnati and, doesn't play his first season. Gets summoned in his second season. And the next thing you know, this program is, taking off. They're winning games. They're coming from behind to beat Ohio. They're winning, a tough road game at SMU. They're dominating Navy at home. They're righting every wrong from the 2017 season. The difference a year makes. They had a whole off season worth of recruiting. And you could profile the recruiting of Cincinnati-based players. That would be something to see. And then you could talk about, you go further, you go to Sauce Gardner. There's still only one mountain to climb that was there in 2019. We knew the Bearcats were very good in 2019. But what we didn't know was, could they beat UCF? There were those who were doubtful, skeptical. I myself, that was terribly worded, I was skeptical too, because I knew UCF was really freaking good. I mean, they averaged around 600 yards a game. Well, they only averaged 424, I believe, that night. All because of one man who single-handedly changed the standing and ranking of the program, Sauce Gardner. This little-known corner from Detroit who's 6th on the depth chart, slowly rising his way, and then when his name is called and when the ball finds him, he picks it off, runs it into the end zone for the touchdown. Program-defining win, program-changing win, and all the Bearcats have done since, outside of 4 games, is win, 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 no matter what. And in dominant fashion, because Sauce Gardner was utterly dominant in college. No touchdowns allowed. Profile him. So those would be your two main player profiles. Now, the main character of this documentary would be Luke Fickell, because he has been the engine, the driver behind everything this program has done. Recruiting, facility upgrades, scheduling, getting this program to the Big 12. That will be another high documented in 2021. And just the personality of Luke Fickell alone, the things he says, who he is about, his identity, that is what makes Luke Fickell Luke Fickell. He be the main character of this documentary. Remember how I've said that the face of a college football program, is typically the head coach? That 110% applies here. And he be the main character of this 30 for 30 documentary. Now, there be other profiles too. You remember The Last Dance. That documentary was all about Michael Jordan. We know that. But then you had these profiles on Scottie Pippen. You had these profiles on Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, Will Perdue, Tony Kukoc from Croatia, John Paxson. Trying to think of who else. I know there had to have been other ones. I mean, there were so many, it felt like. And then you had all these other players. The most in-depth documentary I've ever seen. I mean, they profiled Michael Jordan's relationship with his dad. You saw Michael Jordan's mom, which felt like for the first time ever, at least for me. So there would be other profiles in this documentary for the Bearcats. Brady Collins, Marcus Freeman, Michael Warren, Josh Whyle, Coby Bryant, any player who was instrumental. I'd even put Perry Young in there. Any player who was instrumental in helping build the program. Role players like that. You could even put, did I say Jerome Ford? You could put Jerome Ford in there. You could put, eventually Evan Prater might be in there. More on that in segment 3. So once you profile the players, then you're going to have these games you're going to focus on. The game in Notre Dame in particular. And all of the backstory leading up to it. The departure of Brian Kelly. The fact that he was the head coach of Notre Dame that year. The fact that you could play that soundbite of, Brian Kelly saying that we're excited to give them the opportunity to come and play at Notre Dame. But the funny thing is, Cincinnati was ranked higher going into that game. Cincinnati was favored to win that game. And the number of Bearcat fans who were in attendance at the game that day was astronomical. You could have, sound bites of fans in South Bend surrounding the stadium. You could have, fan interviews. Maybe they'll interview me. You never know. I could be in this documentary. Anybody I worked with on my staff at Bearcats Media could be in this documentary. That's, I was at that game. I can tell you all about that day. Driving up early in the morning, had a parking pass that it took me an hour to, took my friend and I an hour to, or it took me and my friend, did I say that correctly? Yes, an hour to find our parking spot. But you know what? I didn't care. There are so many sources to have for this documentary. And that game in particular, Notre Dame. All the scenes you could have. The Bearcats fans in the stands that day. You could have Desmond Ritter, running through the end zone opposite touchdown Jesus with the flag. You could have, with the flag after the game. You could have the celebration in the locker room. You could have Bearcat fans taking over Notre Dame Stadium and the concourses leaving the game. That would be that probably would be about a 7 to 10 minute segment on that show. And then I go to the end of the season, the 2021 season, when reality is setting in that the Bearcats are going to the college football playoff. Before that, I'd even have College Game Day. How far the program had come, the College Game Day was coming to Cincinnati, Ohio, which up until the last few years, well, maybe not the last few years, but you think mostly of the professional sports teams in Cincinnati before you think of college. But now you've got one of ESPN's signature pregame shows, one of the most watched pregame shows ever, coming to Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati, not downtown. No disrespect to downtown. I love downtown Cincinnati, but the campus, right in the heart of campus, McMicken Commons. How many fans were there at 5:30 in the morning, all the way till noon? The party that was that day, and I just think about that, and I think about the AAC championship when, there were all these possibilities. Well, they don't blow Houston out. Well, if, Oklahoma State wins against Baylor, well, Houston could pull an upset, but you know what? All that didn't happen. Cincinnati wins the game by 15 points, and then the end of the game would be what's highlighted most. Sure, you'd have, the flurry of big, is that the right word? The ferocious rally from Cincinnati in the third quarter, 21-0 run, where you have the touchdown to Leonard Taylor, you have the touchdown to Alec Pierce, and then Jerome Ford breaks loose a big run. All those plays would be featured, and then the end of the game, the CFP chants, everybody with their cell phones out, lit up, Lance McAllister tweeting that it felt like a movie, and you would have all those scenes, and the fans rushing the field, the entire field being covered with fans. You would have all of that in the documentary. Just think about it. Just picture all this in your mind of how this would unfold all the way from the beginning and the highs of, winning bowl games in 2018, College Game Day the first time around that year, and then, all the great wins in 2019 with Sauce Gardner's pick 6, winning the conference championship in 2020, playing in the Peach Bowl, Jerome Fort's big touchdown run in that game, and then you go to 2021 with all the big wins there and all the expectations and Desmond Ridder and Sauce Gardner, rising draft stocks for both of them. Those would be a lot of highs. And then, of course, playing in the college football playoff, getting selected, getting in, the celebration on campus, the whole playoff experience, playing Alabama tough. This would be the climax of this 30 for 30 documentary. But it's the climax. And up next, I'm going to tell you why that means that this documentary is not yet finished. But first, let's hear from two of our sponsors. Alex Frank here with you, Locked On Bearcats, for a Thursday, May 12th, 2022. We're flying today. 30 for 30 Thursday, the Bearcats rise to the college football playoff as explained in my proposed 30 for 30 documentary. This has been fun. I was only going to do this in segment 3, but as I'm preparing my notes for today's show, I'm like, this is not just a third segment topic. This is a whole show. So we're going to make it 30 for 30 Thursdays. I like this. So now we've got Bold Prediction Tuesday, 30 for 30 Thursdays, and I got another topic coming up on Monday that's going to be interesting. And yes, it starts with an M, so just let that simmer for a minute. So the reaching the college football playoff is the climax of this documentary. But that doesn't mean it's finished. What happens next? There's aftermath, right? The Bearcats ended up having 9 players get drafted, which shows the success of the team. You could show all the players, getting drafted, Sauce being in Vegas, Desmond Ridder's party. You could have Alec Pierce, all these players, moving on to the National Football League. But this is still not a finished documentary even then. Because yes, the Bearcats made the college football playoff. But does that mean that this is the peak and that they're never going to get back here again? If you've seen the 30 for 30 documentary on Trojan Wars, what makes it so great is, yes, they chronicled the rise of USC. And that was a very, very good era of USC football. Oh my God. I think they went at least 2 years without losing a game. I mean, it was so long, I don't remember the exact time they lost the game. I think 2003, 2004, they didn't lose a game, and then they didn't lose again until the 2006 Rose Bowl. So that's almost 3 years without losing a game. Back-to-back national champions, all these star players coming to SoCal, but then they also chronicled the fall. Once they lost to Texas, they never went back to the national championship. They lost a lot of games, that cost them chances to play for a national championship. And then ultimately, Pete Carroll gets fired, the sanctions come down on the program. Pete Carroll heads to Seattle, and USC football has never been the same since. Now, perhaps Lincoln Riley is going to turn that program around, but what made that documentary, Trojan Wars, so great was they chronicled the rise and the fall. The climax was, everything in 2005 and how good that team was and all the star-studdedness on that team in Hollywood feel. But then the falling action was they were never the same after that Rose Bowl game. I don't want the Bearcats to be in that situation following their loss in the playoff to Alabama. Now, there is in the plot mountain a falling action and a resolution. And the falling action might be, hey, they're losing a lot of talent, the Cincinnati Bearcats this year. But that doesn't mean that this team is not going to be any good next year. I think it's going to be a very good team. Another reason why this season coming up is so important is to prove that last year's run was not a fluke. I don't think it's a fluke even if they finish 8-4 this year because they're losing a lot of talent. Then you think about, okay, they're going to be able to recruit going into the Big 12. But keep this in mind. As seasons go by and the Bearcats move into the Big 12, if they don't ever get back to the playoff, or if they plateau like we thought Georgia was before they won a national championship, or if they plateau like other teams who come so close to making the playoff every year but just, settle for a New Year's Six Bowl or whatnot, you don't want them to be that. Now, fans are going to wonder, their group of 5, hey, They were doubted all along through this rise to the playoff. They made it, but they're losing talent, and Luke Fickell gained other opportunities. You hope that this documentary doesn't play out where the Bearcats, pummel this year to 7-5 or 6-6, and then Luke Fickell ultimately, leaves for another job. You don't want it to end that way. What you want it is the aftermath to be, hey, they were able to overcome all the talent they lost from 2021. They won a third straight conference championship in 2022. They go to the Big 12, and then they not only get back to the college football playoff, but they win maybe a national championship. It could end that way, all because of one man. And then maybe the documentary ultimately changes to Luke Fickell and how he led the Bearcats to the Big 12 and the national championship. But in terms of the rise of the college football playoff, which this 30 for 30 documentary would be on, there is aftermath. You don't want to just be a one-hit wonder, a darling for 1 year. I don't think the Bearcats will be that way because I think their recruiting is top-notch. I think that players are going to want to come and play here. I don't see Luke Fickell leaving, A, because he's loyal, and B, because what job is going to be open? I don't really think any. But you do wonder if this is sustainable. And then you have all these other questions. In addition to, can the Bearcats sustain this success? What happens to Desmond? Who succeeds Desmond Ridder? What happens once they join the Big 12? You want this to end with sustainability. You don't want to be like any one-hit wonder like Washington or Florida State, Oregon, all programs who haven't been back to the college football playoff since they went. Same too with there's one more team I'm thinking of, Michigan State. You don't want that. This is such a unique story because of where they were as a group of 5 team in the depths of college football irrelevancy. But the other aspect to that is they're in a major city that loves its sports and that loves its University of Cincinnati. That's why a lot of people were upset with where the program was. But you look at where it is now. I mean, I've heard stories from people who tell me that you used to have to go to the football games to get basketball tickets. Now, you don't have to do that because it's going to be 40,000 fans every single game in a stadium that is iconic that is synonymous with the university. It's an iconic stadium not only for the city of Cincinnati, but the country, one of the oldest stadiums in college football. And now you have a program that just went to the college football playoff in the long and storied history that this program does have. But it feels like now this is the greatest era of Bearcats football. And it can very easily be made into a 30 for 30 documentary. It just hasn't been fully written yet. And I don't know when the end will be written. It may take years for it to end. It's certainly going to take 2 years. Because this year and then moving to the Big 12 and how they fare in the Big 12 their first year, and once they get their footing in the Big 12, can they win a Big 12 championship? Can they get back to the college football playoff? Then there's, the positive following action and resolution is that this college football playoff run last year was not a fluke. It showed that the Bearcats are here to stay. Now, the other side of this is they go to the Big 12 and they're a middling 500 team that never plays for a championship and just plays in mediocre bowl games, and it's a one-hit wonder. And it's just hey, remember this? Remember when the Bearcats made the college football playoff? You want it to be, hey, this program made the college football playoff, and it was their springboard to success this year coming up, 2022, moving to the Big 12, and eventually it could end with a national championship. The ending has not been written yet, and it's not going to be written for quite some time. But this right now is shaping out to be a tremendous 30 for 30 documentary. This was fun. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope you had fun listening to this. As you do every day, making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. Thanks for doing that. Now, make your second listen Locked On Big 12, as you can get all of your daily Big 12 news in less than 30 minutes. with Big 12 expert Josh Neighbors. It's free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Don't forget, if you're watching this on the Locked On Bearcats YouTube channel, to subscribe, and you can also like and share a comment on this video. If you're downloading from an audio platform, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast, don't forget to share a comment and give it a rating. All of that helps more Bearcats fans like you find this podcast. As for me, you can follow me on Twitter at Frankie_Natty with 2 N's, NNATI. You can follow me on Instagram, AlexFrank9_, or email me at alex3frank@gmail.com. We've got one more show this week. I've been efforting some guests, so maybe having a guest on tomorrow, but the NFL schedule comes out tomorrow. We'll talk about where you can see your former Cincinnati Bearcats from last year and, well, mainly last year, and where Sauce Gardner's going to be playing, where Desmond Ritter's going to be playing, what week the Falcons come to Cincinnati to play the Bengals. And you know what? I'll also give my thoughts on the Bengals schedule as well, kind of change things up a little bit. I also want to play around with the fun topic, just something that struck me over the weekend. It was a conversation I actually had with my mom about this. Just on a, afternoon walk with our dog, and I pointed this out. It's a very interesting thing to think about. And it has to do with both Cincinnati and Chicago. Might have to get some Giordano's for tomorrow's episode. Or Chicago hot dogs. Those are also good. Vienna beef dogs still remain my favorite hot dog at a baseball ballpark, especially from Wrigley Field. Anyway, thanks for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. I'm Alex Frank for the Locked On Bearcats podcast. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and I will talk to you tomorrow on Friday the 13th. I believe in good luck on that day. Spoiler alert. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.